Record on. Awesome. And we'll get started.
Sure.
Awesome. So welcome back, Sports Medicine Project fans. Now I'm here with my lovely co-host, as always, Kelly Kortik, and we have a very accomplished guest who I think certainly a great role model to all the runners out there, especially any female runners aspiring to any sport. Welcome, Jess Stenson. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah, that's good. Now, what are you up to at the moment? You're in South Australia, is that right?
Yeah, it's the most unique place I've recorded a podcast from. So I'm in the car overlooking a playground. We've just stopped off for lunch. My husband's heading to Roxby Downs, which is in the north of South Australia, for work, and we're on the road trip there. So
Nice.
that's where I am right now.
Yeah, that's certainly dedication to the podcast. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
It's all right.
Good. So yeah, we wanted to, as always, get a bit of a background to yourself and how you got started into running. So yeah, how did it all happen, and who and what were the big influences kind of in your running journey?
Yeah, so I grew up in Naracoorte in the southeast of South Australia. It's a fairly sizable country town with a very strong sporting culture, and sport was just woven into our lifestyles in many different ways without it really being seen as sport. It was just, family bike rides on the weekends, kicking the footy when we were out at barbecues, and then there was gymnastics, ballet early on, and it gradually progressed into netball, basketball, tennis. So I did play a variety of sports, but running was something that actually I'm really grateful. We had a deputy principal at our school who loved cross country, and we did have a pine forest around our school. So he got really excited about that event each year and encouraged all of the kids to take part. We often held or hosted the inter-school cross country day as well with the other schools from the southeast. And so I sort of ended up in running because of that cross country, and I really didn't like it at the beginning, to be honest, because I'd get incredibly nervous. I think it is because I have this kind of innate motivation to push myself really hard. So even as a young kid doing cross country, I'd just push really hard. So I think at the beginning of the race, I'd know how much it was going to hurt out there, but I loved the feeling of finishing. So I'm very grateful for those early running experiences, and probably just the general culture in the southeast where there was that hunger for sport and a drive to be your best. And I was constantly being inspired by people around me who were, making state teams and then Australian teams. And, in the football scene, there were guys from my club who would end up, playing AFL at that point. Women weren't playing AFL, but certainly netballers from nearby were making the state league teams as well. So I think as country kids, we just believed that the sky was the limit.
Yeah, and what was the catalyst to getting into physio? I feel as though people that enjoy sport when they're younger want to do physio when they're older. What was the catalyst for that?
Well, my mum sort of said to me, I remember one Christmas I was given a book about the human body, and of all of the Christmas presents, I just remember loving that one and sort of sitting down all day and just reading the pages. And so from a young age, I was really interested in how the human body works. My dad's a vet, so has a very strong interest in animal health and nutrition as well. And so I was often asking him a lot of questions about, anatomy, and we were out as young kids. He'd wake us up in the middle of the night to take us out to watch a calf or a lamb being born. That was really special. And I remember Mum saying to me quite early on, I think you'll end up, in a health profession. Maybe physio would be a good option. And at the time, I wasn't that interested in physio for some reason. I pictured it being just all machines and not much hands-on. But as the years went on and I finished school, I ended up deciding to enroll in physiotherapy and to see what I thought of it. And I was immediately just drawn into it because of the people I was surrounded by. I found a really strong group of friends in that first year when you're doing some of the drier subjects like statistics and research methods and sociology, and and then you eventually get to sink your teeth into the really exciting, or what I found exciting subjects, the neuroanatomy and physiology and things like that. And then it becomes more practical, and getting into the clinical setting is where I really loved it. So it was just something that probably I didn't see myself doing as a child, but that interest in the human body and how it works that drew me in. And then as my running career progressed, I found that understanding really helpful.
Yeah, how did you juggle running and working initially, and when did you make the call to focus more so on running?
I was fortunate to have a really an incredible employer and mentor early on, Scott Smith at Flex Clinic. So when I was in my second year of study, I think my brother was playing football for one of the local clubs, and I was taking him to a physio appointment. He wasn't old enough to drive, and I was in there watching, and I think it was like the Thomas test or something that was done on him. And I piped up. I was like, oh, we've just learned about this at uni, and got talking to the physio treating my brother, who happened to be the owner of the practice. And we kind of ran into each other a few times because I was also delivering, I was like the trolley girl at a local hospital. And he would be in visiting patients post-op, and I'd be asking if they want a coffee and a meal. So I just kept running into this guy, Scott, and he eventually asked me whether I'd like to come on as a junior admin staff member at their clinic, but also come in and shadow him a little bit while I was finishing my physio degree. And then that progressed into working for him. He knew me well by that stage and knew my running training routine because I'd been juggling it as an admin person as well. So it was 5:30 sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Saturday morning sessions. And so he was really accommodating in my early years of working for him. But admittedly, in 2012, when I ran my first marathon and when I qualified for the London Olympics, I was pretty well working full-time hours, and I found it very stressful leading up to that first Olympics, because suddenly you're bombarded with all of these emails and admin forms to fill out as well. There are some media commitments. And I remember arriving in London for that first Olympics just feeling really overwhelmed and stressed, and just happy to be there, to be able to chill for a week or two leading into the game. So from that point onwards, I started to back off my hours a bit, just so that I wouldn't experience that feeling again.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like we probably run like 70 Ks a week, Kelly and I, and we find that stressful also working full time, let alone to go. Yeah, I can just imagine the emails and the admin. It's crazy. Do you have any advice for people? And we have a couple of colleagues that run it at quite a high level and do a lot of training themselves. Do you have any advice for them as trying to juggle it? Because I imagine it's hard, but it's kind of what you got to do as you progress through the ranks.
Yeah. It was difficult. I found that some of the postures that I'd sort of adopt when I was treating as well were probably putting stress on, say, my niggly hamstring tendon and things like that, without me realizing. The tight back that I'd get from work would. So I think you really do have to pay attention to your postures, your positioning, and your manual labor, manual handling sort of things at work. Sorry. And you just have to be really organized. I was always frustrated that I wasn't more succinct with my notes. I just take so long writing up my patient notes, and I think if I could have been a little bit more efficient there, it would have helped me to get out the door as well. But you've just got to be really opportunistic and use your time well. I would always prefer to actually get a key session done before a work day, rather than that 3-4 p.m. Time of the day when fatigue really hits and you think, oh, I've got this session to do after work today. So if you're an early riser, I think it is nice to be able to get the work done in training early. head to your day of work, and it takes the pressure a little bit off a little bit at the end of the day. But fueling throughout the day is really important too. So if you have done a morning session, making sure you get a really good breakfast in before you start your day of work.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Now, Jess, what would you say? This is an exciting question. I'm interested to hear your answer, but what are some of your biggest career highlights, and when were they? Were they, when you were working, or was it when you made the decision to stop working and focus more so on running? When did those highlights all start to happen?
Well, definitely my debut in Japan, so in the Nagoya Marathon in March of 2012. That was a highlight because my coach and I had gone over there with kind of a dream to run an Olympic qualifying time, but having no idea, what was possible, because it was the first time I'd ever covered that distance. And so 2 hours and 32 minutes was the time I had to try and hit. And I remember at halfway being on time, at 34 Ks, seeing my coach out there on course, and he said, you're on time, you're going well. My body didn't feel like I was going well. My hamstrings were really twinging at that stage. I'd had some, cramping in my tib ants, and I just, when I entered the stadium and saw 2:31 on the clock, I just remember a flood of emotions and that realization that my Olympic dream might be about to come true. So I'll never forget my debut. And the 2014 Commonwealth Games, that was a real breakthrough for me. I'd had my first major injury, I'd say, prior, a stress reaction in my second metatarsal, query fracture, and I'd had to take a period of time off running a few months before the event, and I'd never actually had to train for a marathon in any way other than just running. So suddenly to be in the pool, on the rowing ergo, elliptical, I was doing seated boxing, I was doing whatever I could to stay aerobically fit and strong, and eventually progress back into running. And when I came away from that games with what was a PB at the time and a bronze medal, it was just far beyond what I'd expected going into the race. And it was really special because of the challenges in the lead up, and it showed me that there are so many different ways to prepare for a marathon. And then, the recent Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, that was just all of the learnings and everything kind of coming together on this one day, and just, it was physically and mentally, I just felt like I was able to get it all right on the day. My training is different these days as a mum, but it's actually improved my performance, and mentally I just have this broader perspective. I lined up feeling really calm and excited about the opportunity ahead, really keen to work with my Aussie teammates, Eloise and Sinead, to just get the best result for our country and for all of us individually. And taking that team approach was really fun, actually. We were out there together, and it was just as enjoyable as a marathon can be. And to see my husband and son, who was 2.5 at the time, I think, out there during the race really gave me a boost. And then, to my surprise, they were there at the finish as well. When I don't know, I crossed the line, I didn't even know what to think. I just felt really complete, like everything had just kind of come together in that moment. So to celebrate it with them was really special.
I have to say as well, Jess, like we were watching that, and it was so inspiring, and it's so nice, like being able to even talk to you and hear you say that now, because there's definitely so many people, like I'm a physio and work with a lot of runners, and there's so many of us that were just so inspired by that performance. So congratulations on that. It was really incredible to watch.
Thank you. And I think another part of your question was, when did I stop working in the clinic? So in 2015, I moved to Melbourne for a year and continued working there, just 3 days a week, but like part-time on those days. Came back to Adelaide and started working in a new practice in about 2018, I'd say it was. And then I stopped working a few weeks before Billy was due to arrive. Planned to come back in 2020, and because of the COVID disruptions, it just didn't seem like the right time to return. By the time 2021 came around, I was trying to have a go at qualifying for the 2020 Olympics in 2021. And just, I was finding I was really busy as it was, just juggling motherhood and training and speaking commitments and other roles. I started doing some online running coaching in 2022, and it just, I feel like I need the flexibility at the moment, and so I'm choosing work roles that give me that, just because we've got our little one in early learning 2 days a week, but so often they end up sick or for whatever reason can't go, and I just have a bit of fear of having really rigid work commitments locked in, plus my training commitments. So that's why I haven't gone back to the clinic work, but yeah, it's something that will always be there. Hopefully I'll be able to return to, because I do have a real interest now in the women's health side of things, and working with women who are wanting to stay active through their pregnancies, but then returning to activity after giving birth. And now that I've been through it myself, I feel like I can offer more.
Like on that topic, we'd love to know about your training during and postpartum, or during pregnancy and postpartum, and how do you think pregnancy and well, now being pregnant as well, how has that changed your running and training?
So with Billy, I sort of backed off training before falling pregnant to try and help me to fall pregnant. So by the time I was pregnant, I was just sort of jogging. I wasn't doing many big sessions. This time around, I had finished the New York Marathon. I was still in a fairly, decent training regime when I fell pregnant. And so I was able to do some little sessions in those early weeks just to help out one of my training partners, but just backed off the volume and really just reading my body and trying to be particularly careful in warmer environments, making sure I stay cool and hydrate. So there's limited sort of research out there that can guide how much exactly you can do as an athlete who trains a lot. So you really do have to work with your health professionals to work out what's appropriate for you, which is hard, that there's no kind of, real structure out there that you can follow. But I basically cut back volume and intensity, and now that running doesn't feel the same either, so it's actually not as enjoyable to be out there running. It just progressively gets a bit harder, and that's when I naturally just am interested more in getting into the pool and doing some cross training. So the elliptical and the pool is where I like to be, basically. I'm at 14 weeks now, and I'm already starting to enjoy the cross training a bit more. So I'll keep up with a bit of running more for the social outlet, because I'd miss my squad if I left them for the next 6 months. But definitely it gets a bit harder to keep up. So it's more about joining them for a warm up for their session, and then, maybe for the coffee after their sessions,
gotta have the coffee after.
Keep in touch with them. But yeah, I definitely think my focus is just on keeping some cardiovascular fitness and keeping my body in check through strength and conditioning. So I'm doing those 2 sessions a week as well, and I've actually started doing a little bit of pregnancy Pilates, which is good, because I want to be able to, on the other side of pregnancy, return to running. And I think if I can keep my body in balance and strong throughout this process, it'll give me a good platform.
Do you have any advice for clinicians and for people, going through pregnancy, and for clinicians that are treating runners postpartum? Any advice for them for getting back into running?
Well, for me, I went and saw my women's health physio during my pregnancy, so early on, and then post. I think it was a bit earlier than you usually would see someone. I saw her at 4.5 weeks post. I actually had a C-section. Billy was in breech, so my main concerns were probably just the pain I had at my incision site. I had one end of it was quite stingy and pinchy when I would do anything involving my abdominals, and that restricted my ability to activate through that left side for quite a while. But to have my pelvic floor assessed as well, and basically she just gave me the all clear to get back into some light activities. So I started with the elliptical at 4 weeks, and then by 6 weeks was just on my normal little walk. I'd try a bit of a jog, and it was kind of nice just having this blank canvas. I really made an effort not to compare to my paces from beforehand, but more to put something out there and then try and improve on it every couple of weeks. So I think for clinicians, it's about making those expectations clear for the person, that it's going to be different to, you know, when you stopped running during your pregnancy or whatever, but be excited about the progress you can make and really focus on the progress. And it is about making sure your body is absorbing the load well, responding well to it, because that's going to set you up for success later on as well. Being impatient early can really backfire down the track. So you have to have that long-term sort of outcome in mind.
Yeah, it's incredible to see with other marathon runners as well, people coming back postpartum and post having kids and running these incredible times. It just goes to show like how resilient the body is and how adaptable it is.
That's it. And you just can't chase that too early on. You have to trust that it will work out. You just have to build the layers. And I think there probably are some physiological changes that happen. I've heard blood plasma volume increases. That there's something there. I'm not exactly sure what it is. It could be just the mindset. As a parent, suddenly, you know, it's a privilege to be able to get out and train, probably more than a grind sometimes, because it's just really nice to get out and be able to have your thoughts to yourself and let your mind wander. I think you use your time really wisely. You line up for a race and you think, well, I obviously really want this to go well, but if it doesn't, like I'm fulfilled in other areas of life. That's how I found it anyway. I wasn't relying on my running to bring me the happiness I needed.
Yeah, that's really cool. I haven't heard anyone say that before, but I like it. Jess, you mentioned that you have had a few injuries before, and I've heard you speak about this previously as well, I think on maybe Brad Beer's podcast. Maybe it was even after pregnancy. I think you had a bone stress injury. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you talk us through the management of these injuries and how you dealt with them, both physiologically and psychologically as well?
It was challenging. So I was fortunate to be able to breastfeed for Billy for 13 months. And throughout that period, I sort of acknowledged I was at a high risk perhaps of a bone stress injury, just based on people we'd spoken to before who'd returned to running after giving birth. Trent Stellingworth was one. He's done a fair bit of research involving his wife, Hillary, over in Canada. And so to get through that first year without any injuries, I thought, okay, I'm through the vulnerable phase. And then it was about 3 months after finishing breastfeeding that I had a bone stress injury in my femur. It was a bit of an unusual one, more like an avulsion type bone injury, but it took a little while to diagnose. When we did, I went through all of the scenarios that could have contributed to it. That nutrition, is it, that the minerals and whatnot have been leached from my bones for a year, and now it's kind of led to this injury. Was it that I backed off my strength and conditioning work, which I'd been prioritizing my running over strength and conditioning? Just when you're time poor and something goes, I gave up the thing that I wasn't enjoying the most, but that I probably needed the most. And also looked at the shoe technology. So when I fell pregnant, the super shoes weren't around, well, at least with ASICS, who I was sponsored by at the time. So I came into this world of super shoes being available and was wearing them for the first time, and that could have been changing my mechanics. And so I looked at a whole lot of different factors, basically took my however many weeks I needed off at the time. up to 8 to I can't remember for that particular injury, but got back into it, was feeling strong, and then almost or just under a year later, I had another femoral stress injury on that side, a different area of the bone this time. And it presented as anterior hip pain. So again, took a little while to diagnose. And then I was really frustrated. I was like, all right, what did I miss out last time? What can I do this time? We looked at the paces I was running at and whether I had enough variation. And one thing I wasn't doing was any multi-directional work. So we spoke to a physio who had a particular interest in bone health, and he suggested that maybe adding in some dodging and side to side sort of drills could just help to strengthen my, bones in different ways. I came from obviously a netball and basketball background, and then got into a sport where I literally just run in straight lines. So I started doing some box jumps as well, and which is pretty counterintuitive when you've got a bone injury to be jumping. It can be nerve-wracking at the beginning. I obviously had to wait for the right time to add that in. And just again put even more emphasis on my strength and conditioning. So eventually navigated those 2 injuries and hopefully won't see them again, but it just took a lot of problem solving and addressing a few nutritional things as well, just making sure I was really getting the protein in after training. And fortunately my bone density tests haven't shown any concerns. So
Sure. Did you, like, even when you were saying you had the second metatarsal, and I'm a podiatrist, so that always gets me a little bit excited when I hear anything in the foot and the ankle, but mentioning with the second metatarsal and then the femoral stress reaction, how did you navigate that, like, mentally as a health practitioner? Because you certainly know all the time frames and outcomes and increased risk. Did you find that challenging? Because I know for myself and Kelly, if we ever get a niggle or an injury, we're like, great, it's probably the worst thing I could ever imagine, because you know all the things that it could be. Did you find that challenging whenever you would get any pain or discomfort? Could you kind of think about it a lot more with what you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. In a race, I think it's helpful to have that understanding, because if you're feeling something, it's just, my calf muscles twinging, if I can just, somehow change my bike, you shorten my stride, or you sort of think of ways to offload and problem solve throughout. With my metatarsal, so I had one in 2014 on the right and then 2016 on the left. I unfortunately have inherited the first MTP joint, sort of like the bunions essentially, somewhere along the way. So my big toes are pretty degenerative and stiff. So I kind of, my injury could be quite explained by that, because they were going through a really inflammatory sort of phase where they were painful. And so I was trying to take my weight off my big toes because they were sore, and probably putting a bit of stress through my second Mets. And fortunately, they've really settled down and haven't caused me problems in the last sort of 6 years. I think it was just that point in my career where I was increasing my mileage, my big toes were responding to that, and I ended up with the pressure through my second toe bone. So I think because it could be explained quite clearly there, I just had to hope that my big toes would settle down eventually, which fortunately they have. Orthopedic surgeons look at them and get excited. I'm like, you're not touching them.
Stay away, get away, eyes up here.
So as a practitioner, the benefit I can say is that when you then see people with bone stress injuries and you can relate to that pain, I think it's helped me to pick them up earlier when people present with certain symptoms and the behavior of pain. It's sort of always on my radar because I know what I've experienced, and it also helps you to empathize with them because you know how much running means to a lot of people, and to be told they're not going to be able to do it for a while, you can have those conversations and be really open about your own experiences and how you managed it and some things they might like to consider.
You mentioned strength training a couple of times. How do you now, And when you're in a big sort of training or marathon block, incorporate that into your training, and what are some of the key components of your strength sessions?
So I work with a strength and conditioning coach at the South Australian Sports Institute. So he sets my programs, and then I have them on an app, and I go away and do them at a different gym that has a creche because I do my gym sessions on days that I have Billy with me. So it's basically working the key muscle groups. I think calves are really important. So I do weighted single leg calf raises and holds. I do some very squats and Romanian deadlifts, those sorts of things. So hamstrings, glutes, and just working on control with movement, fair bit with the pulleys involving sort of the abdominal and pelvic control, and then even a bit of upper body work. It's quite a balanced program. It's not one that leaves me with intense DOMs unless I haven't done it for a while. I always, if I miss gym for even 3 weeks, I'll end up with DOMs. But when I'm in a routine of it, I'm not pulling up with sore muscles. Also, I do a bit of mobility work as well. So you don't go into your session the next day feeling like it's being hindered by the gym you've done. My sessions only tend to last for 25 to 30 minutes. I don't have a lot of recovery between my different sets. And so it's sort of a feel-good program, but with a bit of heavy lifting that's sort of targeted just to, I don't know, that feeling of power, and I really like that. I think even for a distance runner, it can be helpful to have a few little power exercises in there.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask. I mean, it's always a scenario when we see runners in the clinic. Strength training is always a chore, which I perfectly understand. When you like to run, you want to go out and run more. What do you think, as a practitioner and an athlete, is a good kind of dosage or base to have for someone to add in their strength training? Do you think a couple of times a week to just help benefit their running, like throughout all ages of running?
Yeah, I think so. I think, 2 sessions is great, but even 1 is still beneficial. If you can't do 2, don't just scrap it all together and at least go with your 1. And I think really looking at it as something that will help you to manage your running load. So that's the incentive to do it. It's not always that. I look at my husband, and for him, he's an 800-meter runner. Gym is a really important part of his training for performance, and he loves doing those explosive exercises, and he feels like if he's not doing gym, he's not going to run as fast. Whereas for me, if I'm not doing gym, I feel like I'll be more susceptible to injury and I won't be able to maintain the same level of training. So it's indirectly affecting your performance, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. What have you learned over the years in regards to load management, Jess? I know we've spoken to Adam, your coach, and he's spoken to us about load management and how he now monitors that. But what would you say you have sort of uncovered over the years?
So I think consistency is really valuable. I've noticed with my own tendons, if I have a prolonged period off after a marathon, they definitely start to get a bit niggly. So I think not increasing anything too dramatically, but also not removing your load and then bringing it back suddenly either. And as a coach now myself, I like to work in cycles where you sort of increase for 3 weeks and then you have a bit of a lighter week, increase for 3 weeks, have a bit of a lighter week. I find that's a really nice time period to progress things and then have a bit of an absorption week. And I've found that that's been, I guess, an approach that reduces risk of injury as well, having that bit of a down week in there rather than just constantly going up or staying the same. I think adding in that bit of a different stimulus is beneficial.
Do you run many trails, or you keep things like, do you change much with elevation and that kind of thing for just some kind of different stimulus?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a product of your surroundings and your situation. So now as a mum, I'm trying to find runs that are as local as possible, because I don't want to spend a Sunday driving 45 minutes to the run and 45 minutes back. And often just being able to leave my door and run is the most effective way for me to train. But that naturally means I am running a fair bit on a concrete path along the river. I can change it up a bit though, and incorporate some laps that are on like a softer dirt surface if I want. But I typically do run a lot on hard surfaces, which I know some people really dislike. I've actually, I just think, become accustomed to it. And I find as a marathon runner, you need to be able to handle the road surfaces. I think too much trail and soft surface running in the lead up to a marathon can be detrimental, but I think ideally I would do a bit more trail running. It's just at this time in my life I'm finding it hard to find those trails. So yeah, I don't think I've got the ultimate balance right now, but when I do have the opportunity to get onto some grass ovals or incorporate some softer laps, I do in my recovery jogs.
Do you run around the block where you live?
No, so I've got a river that goes all the way to the beach or all the way up into the hills, but it is just it's a concrete path. But we actually train on a gravel sort of surface. We call it the uni loop. It's a 2.2k loop.
I see. I follow a couple of guys on Strava, like Nitter and I always see so many people going around there. And I was thinking, like, if you're running around from your house, it would be just so odd if you were just a recreational runner going for a run and like, is that Stenson that just run past the block just on the random streets?
Nah, sometimes I love to run around, just look at the houses in the area, but generally I'll get onto that river path and get out amongst the trees and nature.
Yeah, that's always good. What we had a couple of listener questions come through, and we won't take too much more of your time. We wanted to know, and it's always, I guess, with any runner, favorite workout and favorite shoe, and just any workout, not the one that you would do forever, but just your favorite one to do if you see that in the program, and then your favorite racing shoe.
I actually really like fartleks, which is unusual. A lot of people don't love fartleks, but there's one that we do. There are a couple of variations, but either 600 on 400 float, maybe by 8 to make up your 8Ks, or 800 on 800 float. If you do that by 8, it wouldn't be by 8. Yeah, no, so that's 1600. I don't even know how many times we do that one. Adam changes it up all of the time. Hold on. No, I've got that wrong. There's a 600 on 400 float. There's a 400 on 400 float. And there used to be one we did 1K on 600 float. The 800 on off isn't. But any variation of that, basically, where you're doing anywhere between 8 and 12Ks of that fartlek work, where you're pushing and then you're backing off just enough to be able to then maintain that harder pace again. So you're not jogging, you're just sort of above and below the line. And I feel that you get so strong from those sessions, but they take a bit of practice to master, because if you go too hard early on, you can suffer in the later stages. And then I'd just say one other session I love leading up to a marathon is 3x5K. First one, 5 seconds slower than your planned marathon pace. Middle one at marathon pace. Final one, 5 seconds faster than your planned marathon pace. And you've practiced gels and
Is there anything rest in the middle of that, or just 5-5-5?
Oh, we've done like 3-3-3, and there are different, and sometimes a 4K on 4x1K and then 4K on. So you change up the middle one to be 1K reps. Adam never gives me the same marathon prep. The lead ups are always different in the sessions I do, but they're just a few that come to mind that I enjoy.
Adam was giving me some flack because I'm coaching a guy that's doing London Marathon, and I was like coaching myself, and I was showing him a little bit of the program as a joke, and the only thing I'd prescribe was 2K efforts, and he goes, "You really love those 2K efforts?" I'm like, I do need to change it up a little bit to get some advice from there. How do you, one question I certainly wanted to ask you, with all the clinicians that listen to this podcast, and you briefly touched on it before, when runners are presenting, and all levels of runners presenting into the clinic, what advice would you give to clinicians that are seeing them? Because it's a common scenario for people to, and there's certainly cases where you do need to stop running, but it's common for people to get told, just stop running, rest for 3 weeks, and then start back running again. And we know that most people can run through a bit of a niggle or an injury, and we can modify it and change their running. Would you have any advice to clinicians that are treating the runner, knowing how much running means to people?
Yeah, I think if there's an opportunity to keep them going, but to modify things, that's the ultimate solution for their mental well-being, as well as just maintaining that strength, because you can lose your strength pretty quickly. And if running isn't an option, getting them doing some functional movements or strengthening activities that they can do to keep that, say, calf conditioning, foot conditioning. I think it seems like the easy answer sometimes to just say stop running for a few weeks, but it often doesn't lead to the best outcome. So to be pretty open-minded in your approach and appreciate the role that running plays in that person's life. And if you're a happier, less stressed person, I think your pain experience is likely to be less too. I think sometimes that anxiety and stress can certainly heighten your pain and maybe lead to an injury seeming worse than it is.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
certainly.
for sure. You would have been, did you have Lorimer Mosley and David Butler as your lecturers during uni? Yeah,
pain sciences. Yeah.
That's
cool. They were fantastic.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's good.
Just something back before too. So my favourite shoe to run in, I've only worn ASICS since 2013, but it's the ASICS Metaspeed Sky.
Yeah, is it the one that you run in?
The version one for marathons, but then the Sky Plus for sort of 10Ks and those sorts of distances.
Is there a reason for that? Is it because where the plate sits, or it just gives more return?
Yeah, I've had a few runs that went well in the version one, and then a couple of half marathons I've done in the Sky Plus. I just started fatiguing in the later stages, and I think I just felt like I didn't want to risk wearing it in the marathon. So that's why I've gone for the version one.
They're nice. They're nice and bright, those ones, that orange and yellow.
Yes, they are.
Can you still do that? Do you have this? I'm just imagining just a wall of version ones. Do you have plenty of version ones left? They don't sell them anymore.
I do have a few up my sleeve.
Saving them. Storing them.
Yeah, that's good. All right, we'll leave it there. Jess, thank you so much for coming on, and so much appreciate that and donating your time. It's been incredible.
It's all right. I'm glad the service was all right. I was a little bit nervous with this plan, but it's all worked out.
Yeah, it's worked out well.
That could be a new podcast studio when the car with your headphones in. It's good.
Well, when my husband's battery just carked it, an hour into the trip today, I was worried, but got a new battery and we were back on the road, so it all worked out.
Thank you so much,
Jess. Enjoy your trip. Safe traveling.
Thanks. Bye.